been working on this since about last fall. Some staff also working with our consultant, Lee Burke, who's the car wash incorporator. He's here this evening. He's going to give you a presentation here in just a second. The staff members working on this, we've had a lot of, trying to get a lot of input. Folks from police, Chief Williams helped us, Eric Kearns. We've also had administration, Bob Harker has been helping, also Frank Hope, Chris Blau, Rachel Hawley. So we've had quite a bit of input. And of course we've been also working with Ann Morris, the Downtown Corporation. At this point in the process, Lee has finalized the draft version of the report, and he's here this evening to present that to you. And our objective this evening is for him to give you a basic overview of what is in that draft report and give you an opportunity to have some initial dialogue with him. And from here, the plan going forward is unless we hear otherwise tonight, we'll begin tomorrow a 30-day public comment period. We will make the report available to the public, and we'll have opportunities for them to submit input on the website and other forums. And then that 30-day public comment period will end on October 18th, and we'll hold a public input forum that night to get final comments. And right now the plan is to come back November the 5th, bring Lee back to do a final presentation to you, let him know what we've heard from the public, and then to see where do we go from there with this process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lee. Thank you.
I think this is overriding my, yes it is. That's why mine wasn't working, was taking charge. Well, this presentation will take about 15 to 20 minutes. And I'm going to give you a basic overview of what we found when we did our field work in downtown Burlington. Talk about the public input process, some of the things we heard back from the community. Talk about some of the controls that we think need to be put in place in terms of some of the on-street parking, trying to address some of the concerns that were expressed during the public forums. And also take a look into the future. As part of this study, we looked into the future, what was likely to be happening in downtown Burlington, and what would be the role of parking, and what things you need to be thinking about as you look forward. Some of this is looking 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So first, let me give you a quick overview of the things we found. We did our field work. I'll be going through this fairly quickly because it's not a lot of detail, but if you see something that you want to stop on, let me know, and I'll stop. This is basically your overall capacity. The real issue here is not how many spaces you have, but the fact that they're well distributed across downtown. That's good. Some downtowns it's not that way. You have pockets of parking in different areas of downtown. This one has fairly evenly distributed parking. Of course, this is all public and private. Almost everything that we're talking about, almost, we're talking about both public and private, because in Burlington, your public and private serves everybody at the same time. It just depends on who's using it at the time. It's very unrestricted parking. When we did the survey, these are the number of spaces that were available by blocks. And you see Webb is at the very top. Laser pointer here. A little orientation. This is Webb at the top. Of course, Worth, Church, Main. So you can see there was a fair amount of space that was still available at the time of our survey. Obviously, the core areas here from Front Street down to Maple and from Main over a couple blocks. A little tighter in that area, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Basic statistics, how much of your parking was occupied? About half across town. On street, off street, about the same. Half of it was occupied. Of course, it covers the entire area, and I'll go back just for a second. It covers basically all the area where you see the numbers. So it goes down pretty far. Where's I'm looking for, this is the hosiery mill here. So it goes about the far side of the block. Give you some idea of how far it goes. In terms of, I can see that core areas, those 4 blocks, are a little tighter, 63 to 86% occupied at the peak. 85% we consider you're pretty full. Means you're still okay. You've got a little bit of margin there to work with. You're not going to see no spaces available. but it's starting to appear full to people who are going through the area. The number of spaces that are available when you got the pink, again, the core area was pretty thin. But just this is, I think, on-street. This is not off-street, it's just your curb spaces. So the center area was thin, but still had spaces. If you wanted to find a space on any of those blocks, you could find it at the time of our survey. I took another trip this afternoon when I came down this way, actually midday. Drove around to see what I could see today, and I took pictures through the windshield, stopped traffic a couple of times, and to see if it was similar to what we found when we did our field survey, and it was. So the same things you're seeing up here in the numbers are what I could see today. And I understand it's fairly typical, so I think we caught fairly typical conditions. This gives you a little more, little different perspective. Now, Webb has moved over here now, so reoriented the map a little bit. But these numbers were as a result of a survey that Chris Cloud and his staff did for us. It was a supplemental survey, and I'll tell you why we did that in a few moments. But these didn't all happen at the same time, these 100% fulls, but they did happen at some time during the course of the day. They reached full capacity. So it's not a snapshot of one particular time. I think if we took a snapshot at one time, you'd see some more vacancies there. So this is Main Street, and a lot of the issue, and the next slide I'll be talking about it, I think, you have a lot of ADA parking along here. People with placards who park all day long. By North Carolina law, there's nothing you can do about that. They're allowed to do so. And they park there. They take up that entire strip, and they don't move all day long. Looking at the city's facilities themselves, the ones that you control, and you can determine what use they're put to. Capacity, you have about 900 spaces, and it was about 60% occupied at the time of our survey. When I drove around today to see if that looked typical, it was about the same today as I drove around at various lots. Still available, about 375 spaces across your parking facilities. Public input. Here are the major issues that, based on my perceptions and the notes that I took during those surveys. This was the open input form. People came and talked, and I know there were some folks here in the room that had participated in some of those discussions. Security concerns were very high on the list. That affected a lot of things in terms of how far they're willing to walk and feel comfortable.
Lee,
yes.
Can we address that with, please? Security concern. Can we address that one real quick? We've already done.
I was going to say there's some things that I've done to address that already.
One thing we've done to address this fiscal year, we added retired Assistant Chief Black to downtown patrol during the daytime hours, 4 to 5 hours a day. With the initiation of the school and meetings with LabCorp and other persons finding how many people we got in the downtown area, we've also added security from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. as people leave the core of the city, going back out to the city lots for security reasons. Plus, end of October, the time will change. They'll be leaving work in the dark, and added some security there riding bicycle. On inclement weather, they'll be in the car and or walking. So we've added some security downtown for our core, for the businesses, employees, for residents, and shoppers to feel more secure in coming downtown. We have added some CEPTED. You looked at lot 1.
Do they understand what that is?
Crime prevention through environmental design. They have reduced the bushes down on Webb Avenue at lot 1 near Lexington and Spring, so that you can see into that lot where it's not so enclosed, because you used to not see over the bushes. So that we have looked at some areas to try to make the lots more friendly and enhance security for those lots.
And I'll just make a comment. Number 1, that added security in the evening, just from the things that I heard in the input sessions, is very important, because that's when they're really concerned. They're going back out to their cars during the winter months when it's dark, and they get out kind of, if they happen to park out into the back end of the lot, there's no one else out there at the time. The other comment I make is it is music to my ears to hear someone say, we heard something to do with CEPTED and actually went out and did it. Most often I hear, well, we'll get to that someday. And for me to not even be finished with the end parts of the study and already have that action being taken, it is not normal. I'll just say that in my experience. So it's going to make a difference for folks who park out there. Ann?
Aren't the bicycle patrols new as well?
Yes, they are brand new, a
And
couple of weeks
that's made
now.
a big impact, they're very visible.
We're using reserve retired officers. Billy White is the primary, and he is on the bicycle 90% of the time. So he can get across town a little faster on the streets.
I used to manage the airport parking operations at the Atlanta airport, and one of the things we initiated there was bicycle security, and the shopping in our parking lots dropped like a rock, because they can't see them coming, they can't hear them coming. You know, the police car is very limited, the bicycles can go anywhere, and they pop out of the oddest places. So we really saw an impact at the airport when that was implemented, so I hope that we have the same kind of effect here. They don't, the bad guys don't like bicycles. They're all that general. Okay. Employees parking in the on-street parking all day long. Obviously, on-street parking is the most valuable parking asset that you have. And it's important for your businesses, shoppers and business visitors, to have convenient on-street parking so that when somebody drives through your downtown and they're thinking about stopping to eat, they see a space they can stop and they'll do it, and they don't continue on through the downtown not seeing a space, and it's a year before they try it. So it's really important to have visible on-street parking. That was probably one of the most contentious issues through the course of the study, because you're right on the cusp, and we'll talk about that in a minute, in terms of the kinds of measures that you take to deal with your situation. There was a lot of respect for LabCorp. We heard such great things about the corporate citizen they are here in Burlington. But there were some frustrations voiced by the downtown merchants about what they saw as the habits of a lot of LabCorp people parking in their spaces, which is interesting. And I said their spaces. It's that they didn't like them parking out there because they're taking up customer spaces, but it's also because they're taking up their own spaces. So part of the process here is to say, number one, it's not just LabCorp. It's a lot of employees and business owners that are downtown that are parking in the on-street spaces that need to be parking somewhere else. Leave that open for the customers and visitors. It's a hard message to get across to store owners and store employees in particular. I had it when I did an Asheville study, Biltmore Village area. We had one shop owner that was paying his employees to park in front of the competition. He understood parking. He understood business. So that's what these merchants need to understand here. Not only to worry about the LabCorp folks and the other employees they can identify, but they need to park elsewhere and make sure their employees park elsewhere. If they did that, I think that your curbside problem, even with that 4 employees there, probably would not be much of a concern. Suggestions that shorter time limits might help. They just expressed that. That is not the answer. All it does is frustrate your shoppers, because now they can't park for a reasonable amount of time without risking getting a ticket. So shortening the times would help deal with the employee problem, but it would work against the primary purpose of your downtown on-street parking, which is provide convenient, dependable space for your shoppers to come in. Poor wayfinding of parking facilities. My judgment is that the wayfinding is not that difficult here. Your parking is easy to find. You just drive around a little bit, you can spot it, you have the banners up. Could it be improved? Yes. It can be improved in any city. But is that a major concern from my standpoint as a professional? No, not in Burlington at this time. Although, as you start doing things for your city, like Ann would start doing things to stimulate, to put up thematic information, things that really highlight the parking and so forth, to make it part of the landscape, then that's a real positive thing. But I don't think anybody's really pressed finding parking in downtown Burlington right now. There was a surprising amount of support during the input session for implementation of paid parking. They thought that that was a reasonable approach to trying to get the employees off the on-street spaces and into the off-street parking in order to open up that space for their employees and for them, apparently. Growing need for residential parking. There was some discussion about the fact that there are a lot of residents are coming downtown. That Ann is working to attract people downtown as residents. And one of the issues you're facing is, where do they park? Now, if they're building your own building, we talked about this a little bit earlier today in some discussion. If you're building a building, it's not so difficult. You can build the parking that goes with it. But if you're taking an existing building and you're turning it into upper-level lofts and lower-level shop of some type, then there's no parking for that. So how do you deal with it? So that is a challenge. As Anna's success, or the city is successful in attracting more and more residents, then that's going to become a bigger issue, and it's going to be one that you'll be wrestling with. There was some concern about the potential loss of parking for two-way street conversion, but apparently that's not a real issue. That's not something that's on the table. Now, this may be interesting. There were two questions that we had in an online survey, and the two questions were, so we had a lot of things. What affected your decision to come downtown to shop or do business? And one of the questions was, how far I have to walk to my car? The other question was, how convenient was parking in terms of availability? Well, when I took those two together, because they're both parking questions, that's this. Here are the next ranking concerns about shoppers coming downtown. So parking was an issue. Being able to find and park as long as they wanted, where they wanted to park and be convenient. The interesting thing is, when you compare that to how the merchants see the priorities, here are the business owners. We asked them, okay, basically, what are the shoppers, why do they come downtown, or what are the things that influence them? They said number one is the prices of merchandise, the second one is merchandise selection, then security, distance to car, and parking availability. When you talk to the people who responded to the survey and said that they were shoppers, that's who they were. That's why they're responding to the survey. The number one was the distance to the car. Number two was security, then pricing of merchandise, pricing of merchandise, parking availability down there. Apparently they could find parking, they just didn't like how far they had to walk. And the last was merchandise selection. So it just shows you there is a difference in perception of how the businesses see what the customers want when it comes to access to their stores downtown. This is not uncommon. If you'd asked me how this was going to turn out, I would have pretty much got it pretty close, because it's very consistent in most of the cities I go to. There is a disconnect between the shopper perspective and the merchant perspective. So since the on-street parking was a critical issue, we did a turnover survey. In fact, we did two turnover surveys. We did one during the study, and we found out that because of how we were interpreting your ordinance was different than how you actually interpret it and enforce it, so it changed the results of our turnover study. So Chris Clow and his folks went out and did another survey. We broadened the area to take out the entire block, the box that you see there, did all the on-street parking for a full day, start to finish. What we found is that in the 1 hour section, the spaces that are primarily down Main Street, half of the parkers stayed for more than 1 hour. Now, again, a lot of those are the ADA parkers, folks with the placards that are camping out all day in those spaces. They used up about half of the capacity. It means you have so many spaces, so many hours a day. So if you have 10 spaces, 8 hours a day, that's 80 hours worth of parking that's available. So they used up about half of that capacity. But the parkers that were actually in the spaces all day long, they used up 84% of it. Were overtime parkers, people staying longer than 1 hour.
ADA placards.
No, a portion of them were. That one block is just ADA all the way in, basically. In the 2 hour area, 23% stayed longer than the 2 hours. Now they only chewed up, consumed 25% of your total 2 hour capacity. So that's not too bad. But it was about half of the total time consumed by people parking in the street. A lot of times I'll translate that and say you take all these overstay parkers and you take the amount of time they consumed, and now you convert it to the number of 2 hour parkers that could have parked. It's 100, 200, 400. I think here it was 600 additional parkers that could have parked in the space that was occupied by overstay parkers. So if you start getting into trouble, your businesses really see, or you really see, that when I drive downtown, I can't find a place to park. I can look down the street and not see any empty space. You'll have plenty of ammunition to go back to the public and say, we need to make some changes, because the data shows it. And Chris has the know-how now to go back and redo this if he needs to in another year and take another look at it. This is the ordinance. So change the position of the vehicle from one point directly to another point in the same block shall be deemed one continuous parking period. Well, we interpreted that means that you couldn't stay in the same block. That's not how it's enforced. It's if you go around the corner, you're okay. That's considered a repark. So we're proposing that be changed. The ordinance doesn't have to be changed. Just you have to publicize the correct interpretation. Well, I say correct interpretation. It's my interpretation. It's the most common interpretation. That if you're parked within that same block, anywhere around it, then that is a continuous park. And the reason that's important is because if you watch the shuffle go on with the employees. 2 or 3 of them will come out, and they'll be parked in different parts of the same block, and they'll go move one space real quick before anybody else comes. When they have to go around and go down the street, then it's risky. They don't find a space. It takes longer. It's a lot more clumsy to try to do that. But they can go out together and move everybody in one space quickly and go back in. It's very efficient. So you want to try to keep that from happening. People are very creative. Very creative. Part of my business is computers. Part of it is community development, and the other one's behavioral science. One of the things that's easy, partial fix for the employee situation is to move the start time for your enforcement period to 8 o'clock in the morning instead of 9 o'clock. The way it's set now, because it starts at 9 o'clock, if you get there at 8 o'clock, you have to move your car one time. If you move it to 8 o'clock, a lot of people who come to work at 8 o'clock have to move it once, then they have to get out at lunchtime and beat feet over to the car and get it moved again before your enforcement person, who is one of the most efficient enforcement people I've encountered in my 15 years, gets around and catches them. She is worth her weight in gold. I mean, and let me emphasize that for a second. I have no idea. She reports to you guys, doesn't she?
Yes, sir.
I say she's worth her weight in gold. Let me tell you, the biggest frustration in cities, but it's hard to get them to admit it. The biggest frustration in a tightly enforced city is inconsistency. Because people can get away with it today, get away with it tomorrow, and they get to take the third day. Not the case here. I think they understand there is no room in that. It's very rigid. They know where the fence is. They cross the fence, they're going to get a ticket. That's the best kind of enforcement you can have. Oops. Did I do something wrong? Whose toy is this? All right.
I don't know why it's not working.
You currently have rental spaces in your system. People who basically have their name on a space, it's a number, but it's reserved to them and them only. You're okay with that right now. It's not an emergency to do anything about it because you still have a fair amount of additional space available in your off-street parking lots, your city lots. But at some point, you've got to get rid of that. The most inefficient use of parking space is a reserved space that's reserved for an individual. And when I go into a city trying to target it, or a state organization, I work with the state of Florida for statewide analysis, the first thing I look at is how many reserved spaces do you have? They have lots. So you get rid of those, you can take 150 people and park them in 100 spaces. But if it's all reserved, 50 of them are sitting empty most of the time. So that's the way to do it. You give them a monthly pass, you mark this area as for monthly parkers only, and they take whatever space is available, and you make sure you don't oversell the area. It works most everywhere else. It's a basic good parking management. By the way, my background is parking management. I've been managing parking facilities since 1978, down to all of the 41 locations in downtown Nashville, Kansas City. Anybody been to Kansas City? Crown Center Complex. I managed that parking in the 2 airports and so forth. So I've been a parking manager for a long time before I started doing that. Anyway, that's the way to do that when the time comes. But it's not urgent to do it now. Okay. Stopping that, looking to the future. Here's what I see. Not a lot of prospect for new speculative office buildings. It means that Burlington's not much different than most cities that I'm dealing with anywhere. No one's seeing spec buildings go in. Interest in additional downtown housing opportunities. That's starting to really gin up. It's rehab, the upper stories of some of the buildings. The greatest prospect overall is adaptive reuse of existing space, which I would expect in a town that looks like Burlington, who still has a lot of character in the buildings that it has downtown. It's attractive. You change some of those building faces, you put some trees and some sidewalk cafes out here, and it really is going to be a great looking town. Already is. You look at the co-op, what it's doing along that area with Paramount. It's really starting to go. So the retail, lower cost office space, and service businesses. But one of the questions that I answer, or I'm asked to answer sometimes, is, and Ann will be asked to answer when they have prospective people coming in, is what about parking? How much can they support? Will this parking in the area be able to support the businesses that they have? The first thing I did, Ann and I spent about half a day together, just crunching numbers. At that time, it's fewer now. You filled some of those, I say you, they were filled. Whether, hopefully, your efforts.
They're in the process.
In the process, okay. It was about 50,000 square feet of building, a vacant space downtown that was office or retail space formerly. We looked at the retail and we just assumed, okay, 70% of the retail space would stay retail, maybe 20% restaurant, that'd be great, and 10% office, and then all of the office space would stay office space. So we converted that to what the parking demand would be. Parking demand would mean you need 168 spaces to support all of that rehabilitation. So you fill all the buildings you have downtown with good active uses, you only need 168 spaces to do that. You have 371 space surplus just in your city lots. So you as a city, just dedicating your city lots or making them available, can support all of that rehab work, which is a good thing. We looked at the Front Street corridor, just it's a subset of the other, and said, okay, what happens if you redevelop just the Front Street corridor, which seems to be the one that's most active right now with the stimulus of the co-op. You need about 90 spaces. So if you have 90 spaces down along that area, you can support it. And you do. You have it in one lot, which is the lot behind the co-op. There's enough parking there to support that. So you're in good shape in terms of not having any parking inhibitors as you all move forward and try to stimulate some of that rehabilitation activity. We took a look at your Burlington Downtown Master Plan and said, okay, what happens if all of those sites that have been identified in the master plan have developments that are similar to the ones that they were envisioning in the master plan when they did it. So Ann and I sat down again and we kind of massaged some of their assumptions and came up with a list of things, and these are just hypothetical, totally hypothetical, just for us to run a model to look, see. And what it came down to is that it would need, because of a combination of new demand, you get over here where I can do my magic corner, new demand to be generated by the developments themselves, and the loss of existing space, you need about 1,000 parking spaces added to the system to maintain what you have now. And you can absorb some of that, you have 371 spaces. So you could absorb part of that if you just used up all your surplus now. But you'd have to build some parking to go along with that. So those developments would have to furnish parking on their site. They couldn't just build the building and expect your system to support all the parking. You can't. So new parking has to be part of that type of development program. Looking at the Front Street corridor, same process, and the number gets down to about 550 spaces. So you can almost support the Front Street, but of course not all the spaces are in that area, in your city surplus right now. But we back up for a second. You get all your employees off the on-street spaces and into their lots that their employers are providing, and into the city lots, and off. Then you're creating more space in the city, on the street. When you're looking at the development sites, the downside is that all of them take away city parking. I think all but one, almost, most of them. So you're actually losing parking. So that if a developer comes in and says, I want to develop this site, and the city sells them the site, you may have 200 parking spaces on that site. So the developer goes in, and one of the analysis that I did was, with the land costs and so forth, can a developer afford to comply with a city request that they not only provide their own parking, but also replace what they're taking away? It doesn't work. It will not pencil. But you can't expect that. So if the developers come in and develop, you can ask them to develop their own parking to satisfy their demand, but you can't ask them to put in the replacement parking. They won't. It will kill the deal. So the city has to be willing and able to provide your own parking, replacement parking. We've already covered the rest of that. I already talked about that. I guess you'll eye scan the rest of those. Those are points we already just talked about. The funding of future parking development. The first thing is somebody has to pay for it. The money doesn't just pop up out of the ground. Two funding sources: property owners, and I consider city space property owner space, because the property owners of the county or the city have paid for it at some point, so they really are the secondary owners. The other is for user paid. It means that people are using the facility with paid parking. They're paying part of the freight provide that parking. It can be a combination of both. The city can provide it, subsidize it, and offer it at rates that are lower than what it costs to actually provide it, so that the users are paying part of the cost, and the taxpayers or the business owners that are downtown and benefiting from the parking are paying part of the cost. Does anybody have any idea what it costs if you build a parking structure, what it costs on a per month space for one parking space? Anybody?
Was it around 40?
That's a little high. About 100, with a 30-year amortization, 5%. And you're putting back some annual reserves to keep the facility at $300 a space operating cost. It's about $133 a month per space. So if someone is going, if you're going to build a 500 space garage and pay for it by user fees, meaning the people that are parking there are paying the total cost, they each have to pay $133 a month. So vertical space is very expensive. So generally there has to be some subsidy to that from the city. You have to broaden that out, or else, unless you're in Atlanta or a larger city, it's hard to command those kind of fees. So most cities do subsidize the parking to some degree with tax money. The other thing is that the funding system must include on-street and off-street. That may seem obvious, but we've had at least one city that we set up, consulted with them on their entire program. They built a new garage and charged for the garage, didn't charge for their on-street. And they wonder why they're having a hard time meeting their debt service. It is a system. Off-street and on-street are a linked system. You can't do something with one without looking what's happening with the other. And one of the principles to remember, if you can take this to the bank, and I'll step my thing and say, don't forget this after tonight, is your on-street has to be more expensive than your off-street. It has to cost more to park on the street than it does to park off the street. So all your employees make the choice to get out of the way and park in the parking decks and on the surface lots, out of the way of customers and visitors who don't mind coming in and paying 50 cents an hour if the space is available. When we did the parking study for Asheville, North Carolina, it was back before they took the big surge. And one of the problems was you circled around trying to find a place to park, but the garages were empty. So your rates are upside down. You've got higher rates in the garages than you do on the street. And the merchants were all like this. You can't raise the prices on the street. The Asheville Mall took all of our business. We're just now trying to get it back, and you're going to kill it. So you've got to get those prices up and get the prices in balance the right way. So the parking director spent a year going around and talking to every single key business person and convinced them, using the study. They went to city council and said, we want you to do it. City council got cold feet and brought them up on par, and it worked some. Then a year later, they finally pushed hard, and they did it the right way. And the newspapers were full of articles about what's happened in downtown Asheville. You can actually go downtown for lunch and eat and park and leave and get back to a reasonable town. It just changed the whole complexion of how the public viewed the downtown area. That's where you will be at some point. Right now, you still got a sufficient enough space downtown that I can't, in good conscience, say make that leap. I don't think your citizens are ready for that yet. But at some point, they're going to start getting frustrated again. That's when you'll hear it. You'll start getting in the newspaper. You know, I used to like to go downtown, but now I don't because I can't find a place to park. I love to go to lunch, but I can't find a place to park. When you start hearing that over and over again, then it's time to take another look and let Chris Plow and company go around and do a measurement again and see what the actual numbers are. And you'll know, and it's time to implement the paid parking. And the businesses downtown will benefit from it tremendously. Always do. Always do.
What was the street appeal? We said that it would take $133 a month to pay back the cost to build. What was the
build and operate and everything?
All right. So what was the actual cost per space to
15.
build?
It was pretty cheap. 15,000 plus 18% soft cost. Design and testing fees and all that. 5% interest rate. You go to 4% interest rate, it drops down to $123. I'm not that smart. I just did it this afternoon so I can remember. It's pretty expensive. When you're doing a surface lot, compared to $15,000 per space, you're looking at $3,000, $2,000. Do a lot of decent landscaping, it's more than $10,000 to $3,000. The cheapest you can get, the Kmart parking lot is probably $1,200.
we're talking about a parking deck, 15,000.
15,000. Now, just a few years back, you would be hard to get a decent deck for 15. But right now, the prices are pushed up. 10 years ago, 15 was kind of the standard. So it's kind of returned as a standard as a temporary standard. But that can go way up depending on what's doing outside. It's not the internal structure, it's the outside.
But if you had paid parking on the street, on Main Street here, then that would take some, not, I had a handicap ticket one time, I had to turn mine back in, but that would take some of that would take some of that back of parking off of Main Street.
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
It'd move it someplace else.
Yeah.
Yeah, the challenge with putting paid on-street parking is you can't do it in half measures.
Yeah.
Because you do it in a small area, then it just moves out. Then you have to do it there, then it moves out again. So as my cohort, John Nolte, who has a lot of experience in on-street parking, says, you have to bite the bullet. If you're going to do it, do it. And so we have 2 phases, and I think I actually will show that here in a second. Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, I found boldness, what did the golf buy either?
I think they're working that area.
That's the problem right there.
Well, they're just parking spaces. It's not, they're not marked handicap. They're just where they're parking. They're choosing to park there and you can't make them move. No, by the way, North Carolina law says that you cannot require a person that has that placard to move, or can't limit the time that they park. So unless they're paying for it, there is no limit, there's no limit that you have, there's no control that you have.
That one block of Main Street, that 27 parking spaces, was 22 handicap placards.
Yeah, that's, about what we said.
Very, very few. I really love that block. I see it out of the car.
One of the things that you may, I know Riley just went through this, and I told Nolan that probably one of the experts in the Southeast is Morton Dash, Director of Parking in the City of Raleigh. He did the comprehensive parking and transportation study for the City of Raleigh. And that was one of the big issues, was that was ADA parking. It was a real touchy, hot potato, high media exposure type of situation. They attacked it. And actually the people who were promoting action was the ADA community, because they were going to pay out actual marked spaces on the street. Well, if you don't change the law, having a handicapped parking space on the street is meaningless. As an employee comes in and camps out all day, so if I'm coming in the shop, I've got to find something somewhere else. So they were very supportive of the change. So what they did was they were implementing paid parking pretty much across downtown Raleigh, and they ordered the meters and had them programmed so that if you had an ADA placard, that you could program it that you're ADA and you could park all day, but you had to pay the all-day rate. So
Did that move them? Did that move them?
Move some, yes. And my last conversation to find out that Gordon got cut off because he had another call coming in and I didn't find it out how well it was working. I need to spend a day with that.
It would move the ones like you said back there that are not handicapped, or not truly handicapped. Those are the ones that would move.
Well, that's in Raleigh. One of the things that happened was the news media got on the case. They started doing on-the-spot interviews with people who were going back and forth to their cars, and appeared to be very mobile to find out, are you the person that's attached to that placard? Because if the person's not with them, they're not authorized to use it. It's not the vehicle; it's the person that the placard is attached to. So if I'm driving you with your placard, I'm illegal. So I know if you've got that kind of system down there, you probably have that, and you watch the walk back and forth. You probably have some more on that. So that needs to be cleaned up, just out of respect for the folks that really have a reason to have those placards.
Just going back to Raleigh and what you talked about, doing it all or nothing, they did, however, phase that in.
Yes, because they had such a big project.
Right. So, I mean, it is possible to, with foreknowledge, you're going to do this area, and then the next year do this area. You know that it's going to move out, so you have that knowledge, but you don't have to do it all in 1 to 3 month period. I mean, you can phase it out over 24 months. Or
yes, you could do it. Well, in Raleigh's situation, it was a matter, they couldn't do it any faster.
right.
That was the limiting factor. They really just couldn't roll it out any faster. Funding sources to think about Sale of the city-owned land. If you or have a developer who wants your parking lot to build one, you can sell that property, use those funds to buy replacement parking someplace else. You can get space lease commitments by developers. If you provide the parking, they commit to a lease agreement with you, so that they're obligated for 10 years or 15 years. Obviously, the city takes a risk if they default on the lease, but at least you get upfront commitment for the capital to do that. Impact fees, if they're coming in and developing and they're not providing enough parking to supply their needs, then you can ask them to pay an impact fee. Generally speaking, the funding source that's paying for that project is going to require parking, whether it's residential or office or anything. In a city of this size, with limited transit support, limited transit dependency, they're going to expect there to be adequate parking support. So the bank is not going to let them develop it unless there's enough parking. So it's almost, at this point, self-enforcing requirement. You don't have to have a requirement for them. In lieu fees, that's if you require minimum parking standards, you could give them a choice. You either provide the parking that's needed for your development, or you pay us to provide it, in some combination of both. Very useful if they find out that their footprint can only accommodate half of their need, but then they pay you to provide the other half. And one of the other interesting things about that is that you can fluctuate that in lieu fee, so you can subsidize to some extent. You can turn it on, turn it off, up and down, to encourage development to come downtown. It's part of parking being used as a development tool. Parking can be a dramatic development tool. Increasing property taxes, obviously. Parking system users, parking revenues, and also the additional sales tax generated by the businesses coming downtown because you're providing good parking. So those are about almost the only sources you have. There may be some others, but these are the primary ones. We're almost done here, by the way. We've already talked about implementation of paid parking. It is the best control for on-street parking, period. You will never achieve the level of enforcement, the level of compliance, the level of self-management in your on-street parking system with enforcement, regardless of how good it is and what kind of crackerjack staff you have. You'll never achieve the same level of control and self-management that you will with paid parking. So you'll get there at some point. It's a matter of recognizing when that time comes and knowing this is where we're going, this is what we're going to do. And what we recommended, let's see what is up there. Well, we've already talked about everything here. So I'm just going to trying to save you all some time. These are the rollout zones, our revised rollout zones. We did a smaller area first. We did a pin-up review of it in-house and said that's not going to work. You need to cover the yellow area on the first layout. Then you may be able to add the blue layer. That's a pretty good size area to include. The things to take away tonight, if you implement paid parking, it should be a combination of multi-space meters and single space meters, which you have to have in the system because there are a lot of blocks where you want just one or two spaces, that's all that's there. So to put a $10,000 meter to control two spaces is not economically feasible. So it's a combination of multi-space meters. I know you all know what they are. They're pay boxes, and you go in and put the space number where you park, and you pay, and then you're okay. But both the multi-space meters and the on-street meters should be credit card devices. The on-street meters with credit card capability is a fairly new development. It's been around for about 5 years, but still it's new in our industry. And what you do is you roll it out and make it acceptable to the community is the fact that they don't have to carry a lot of change. The biggest frustration with paid parking on street is that people end up there with all the good intentions in the world, and they don't have to change the feed the meter. They got to go find some place to get change, and the stores tell them, you know, I'm out of change. Everybody's been coming to me today, so go someplace else. So adding the credit card payment option streamlines the entire implementation process and makes it very, very palatable for the community compared to the options that just used to be available. Numbers, $8,300 to $12,000 per unit for the multi-space meters, about $700 a unit for the single-space meters. The report actually provided a pro forma of what the annual income is projected to be. That is highly estimated. It's based on a really good model, but the one thing you can't predict, particularly in today's economy, is how far people are willing to walk to escape paying anything. Their employees. Because employees will continue to be part of that revenue stream. And And in Raleigh, they found out that during this implementation process, it was, you put it in here, they run over there. You put it over there, they run over there. They ran from it. So until Warren was able to get the entire area covered to a reasonable walking distance, they kept running from the revenue. So the projections were not hitting for a while. It'll be interesting to see what happens in about a year. Residential, very quickly. The city is under no obligation to provide residential parking. That's a hard nut to crack with some of the developers. But you can be very firm with those that are building new buildings and say you have to provide your own parking. If they're financiers, are going to probably require it anyway. Where Andes has a challenge is how to help them find parking when they're rehabbing or they're going to the second floor of an existing building and they have no parking on site. So the city can work with them, particularly if it's arrangements for evening parking, to accommodate them as best they can, with the understanding that it is a temporary arrangement, that it's their responsibility. The city will try to accommodate them as long as they can, as long as the parking is available. But what you do not want to have happen is for the downtown residents to get the idea that they own the on-street parking. They do not. Or that they own the city parking. They do not. That is the primary bread and butter of the downtown businesses. So the residents have to provide for their own parking. If you have paid parking, you will find private property owners will start getting in the parking business. They'll start making their parking available to residents to use at night and that type of thing. But until paid parking is part of the system, you'll have a hard time finding those arrangements. Money does a lot when it comes to road grading goals. And by the way, if you really get a terrific downtown where people want to live downtown and work downtown, it makes it even worse. Because they park on the street or in your lot, and they stay all day. They don't go someplace else. They work downtown. They walk over to the land. General conclusion, you have sufficient capacity to support near-term redevelopment activity. That's really good news. And doesn't have to worry about apologizing for parking situations 2 years down the road when someone's made an investment in a new restaurant. Typical problems of utilization of on-street parking. You have the same problems here that I see all over the country, nothing new, nothing different. Paid on-street parking is ultimately the best management once that critical level is hit, but I don't recommend it yet. You have to get public support. It means public pain at not being able to find a place to park. It's not there yet. Paid on-street parking is a necessary platform to establish an environment for off-street paid parking. You can't do off-street paid parking unless you have on-street paid parking. Now, there are exceptions. You have some private landowners that offer their property and people will park on their lot and pay them a small amount per month. That can run on itself for a while. But in terms of the city really having a program, you have to have one. And that's what I was talking about, stimulating the private activity. And sooner or later, you'll also be charging for your city lots as well. And we have a description of how to do that in the report. I know that was like a fire hose. Any questions? So you have enough parking. If